some documentation about the progress of district judge nominations in the 111th and the 112th Congresses. I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Sturkaka.
The Senate is expected to resume consideration of the Surface Transportation or the Highway Bill any moment now. There'll be 2 votes on amendments right around noon Eastern, and that'll take the Senate to a break for their weekly party caucuses, which is expected to happen at 12:30. At 2:15, senators will return for further votes on about 20 amendments to the Highway Bill, and a vote on final passage expected later. Majority Leader Reid is aiming to finish the measure today. Yesterday, Harry Reid filed cloture petitions to proceed on 17 judicial nominations. You heard them talk about that today. Votes on a number of those could come up as soon as tomorrow. Also, as you heard during the exchange this morning between Majority Leader Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Harry Reid is hoping to make a deal to move ahead on several pieces of legislation that have been lingering on the Senate's agenda, including the jobs bill and postal legislation. No final word on whether or not a deal on those items has been worked out or will be. As the Senate continues in this quorum call, continued work on the surface transportation bill, or the highway bill, coming up in just a moment. Shortly, we are planning to go live to the White House Rose Garden. President Obama this morning is expected to make remarks on trade policy with China. He'll update on U.S. efforts to enforce trade rights with that nation. The White House has stated the intent is to level the playing field for America's businesses and workers, quote unquote. The president this week is also hosting British Prime Minister David Cameron. He arrived yesterday for an official visit. President Obama and Prime Minister Cameron will be traveling to Dayton, Ohio today. They'll be watching a college basketball game. Tomorrow, they'll hold official talks, and there'll be a state dinner. First Lady Michelle Obama and Samantha Cameron will take part in an Olympic-themed event with D.C. area school children. Again, standing by, waiting for the president. We'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
Minority leaders, I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be able to speak for up to 10 minutes in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I've come to the floor to talk about an amendment I'll offer later of the Nat Gas Act. And I would say, Mr. President, what if I were to tell you that there was a transportation fuel that is over $1.50 cheaper than gasoline and roughly $2 cheaper than diesel? What if I were to tell you this fuel is also cleaner and has fewer smog-causing pollutants than diesel, and if widely used could reduce the cases of asthma and lung cancer? And what if I were to tell you this fuel is abundant right here in America, so much so that we may soon become one of the world's largest exporters of this fuel? Mr. President, I think I might hear you say, sign me up, which is the name, what is the name of this wonderful fuel? The name of this fuel is natural gas. You can see in this chart that as gasoline prices are already skyrocketing towards $4 per gallon, the price of compressed natural gas is barely above $2 per gallon equivalent. Natural gas prices used to follow oil prices, but now they're on their own stable, inexpensive price levels. And the same holds true for liquefied natural gas. As you can see here, gas prices here, liquefied natural gas down here. Diesel prices now exceed $4, and LNG is still hovering around $2 a gallon equivalent. So why aren't we all driving around in natural gas vehicles paying a little over $2 per gallon equivalent? The reason this inexpensive fuel is not widely used is because there are not many natural gas vehicles in the United States, and there are also very few places to refuel. Currently, there are nearly 14 million natural gas vehicles in the world, but only about 117,000 in the United States. The car and truck manufacturers want to see that natural gas utilities will invest in refueling infrastructure, and the natural gas utilities want to see more natural gas vehicles on the road. So it's a classic chicken or the egg problem. What both the manufacturers and the utilities need to see is a strong stance by the federal government to jumpstart this market. The Nat Gas Act will do just that by jumpstarting the industry and in 10 years add over 700,000 natural gas vehicles to our roads and help incentivize the installation of refueling stations around the nation. In addition, it is estimated that the bill will displace over 20 billion gallons of petroleum fuel and create over 1 million direct and indirect jobs. Now, I know that some of my colleagues are thinking, isn't this just another handout to energy companies? And the answer to that question is a resounding no. This legislation is fully paid for with a small fee on natural gas used as a vehicle fuel. As I mentioned earlier, natural gas is over $1.50 cheaper than gasoline or diesel. This amendment will use some of those savings to help overcome the market barriers for natural gas vehicles and supporting infrastructure. The fee starts at 2.5 cents per gallon, equivalent in 2014, and grows to be 12.5 cents in 2020 and 2011, and in 2022 the fee is eliminated. In this way, we can still keep natural gas less expensive than other fuel options while investing in infrastructure to help grow the market, make natural gas vehicles cheaper, and put the industry on a path to flourish on its own. While the legislation itself is designed to provide a temporary boost, it's important to note that natural gas supplies we are sitting on are enormous. North America's natural gas resource discoveries have more than doubled over the past 4 years, meaning that at the current rate of consumption, this resource could supply current consumption for over 100 years. And if we do not use our natural gas here in America, it will be exported abroad, benefiting consumers in other countries, while American families will continue to pay higher prices at the pump. Already, one U.S. facility has received a permit to export natural gas, and 4 more are following suit. We can use that natural gas here in the United States to displace oil that we are sending trillions of dollars abroad to countries that our despotic wish us ill, or we can export it so that other countries can gain the benefits. I say we use it here. The Nat Gas Act will also increase our nation's energy independence and make us less dependent on regimes that do not have America's interest at heart. This is especially important at a time when Iran is attempting to develop a nuclear weapon and threatening to block oil supplies. Natural gas is not the only solution, but it can be an important part of a solution where that will allow us to ignore future OPEC threats because we have alternative to oils. But until we get to that point, we need to do all we can to supplant oil. It's also important to note that natural gas vehicles are an important way to improve air quality. According to the EPA, natural gas as a vehicle fuel has very low emissions of ozone-forming hydrocarbons, toxics, and carbon monoxide. By producing less of these harmful emissions, natural gas vehicles can reduce smog in our cities and lower incidence of asthma and lung cancer. These health benefits are one reason why Los Angeles County has made almost its entire fleet of 2,200 buses run on compressed natural gas. Now, let me talk about one thing some are concerned about. While natural gas vehicles can have important environmental and health benefits, we must also keep in mind that natural gas is still a fossil fuel, and there are serious risks that need to be weighed when it is extracted. For that reason, I think we can do and need to do better to regulate a practice called fracking. I also believe these risks mean that certain environmentally sensitive areas should be off limits for fracking. And I'll continue to work with colleagues such as Senator Casey to better formulate federal rules to protect our drinking water from possible contamination. At the same time, we should not kid ourselves. This amendment will not cause natural gas vehicles to be the main driver of natural gas demand, and fracking is used to extract oil as well. So voting against this amendment will not reduce the amount of fracking. We cannot let this opportunity slip by to use this cheaper fuel to increase our energy security, improve our air quality, and relieve the pain at the pump. It is time to put in place the temporary, fully paid-for incentives of the Nat Gas Act to follow the natural gas vehicle industry to flourish. Just remember, if you vote against this amendment, you cannot go home and tell your constituents that you have done everything you can to reduce gas prices. I hope our colleagues will join us when the time comes to offer the amendment on the floor and to support it. And with that, Mr. President, I see the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. for a moment about an important issue that is going to be addressed on the highway bill. And I have an amendment that would basically say you cannot toll a federal highway unless it is for the production of another free lane. So it is an effort to curb a state from tolling every lane of a highway that has been built with federal dollars by federal taxpayers. When President Eisenhower established that the policy that we would have a national highway system, it was really for national security that he made this monumental policy decision, which has taken us years, tens of years, to complete. It has had the added advantage of commerce, of course. Having a national highway system where all of our states are connected with good quality federal highways has been a huge boon for our country. That has been funded through highway user fees, the gasoline tax that everyone pays at the pump in our country has funded our federal highway system. However, Mr. President, the highway system has now been completed, the federal highway system. For a state to come in and toll every lane of a federal highway is not only disingenuous, but it really breaks the faith with the federal taxpayers who for over 50 years have paid into the Highway Trust Fund so that we would have a federal highway system for all Americans and for the commerce among our states to use. Now we have, frankly, we've got 3 states that have been approved by the Highway Division, the Department of Transportation, to do exactly what I would like to prohibit, and that is toll lanes of a federal highway that would prohibit the free use of that lane, that whole highway that has been built with federal dollars. So my amendment would keep us from going beyond the 3. The amendment is 2. I would extend it to 3 because there are 3 that the Department of Transportation has approved, but I want to stop this practice. It is wrong. It is wrong for the federal government to allow it. It is wrong for the states to ask for it. We need to allow actually the opposite, and that is the opt-out ability for a state to say, we want to spend our highway dollars the way we believe the priority should be spent. And that's what we ought to be doing. And I want to say that I don't disagree with tolls that are going to create a new free lane. That would keep the faith of the people. It would expand the system, and the people would be paying to expand the system. That can be done in an effective and, frankly, a responsible way. Senator Portman has put in an amendment that I would support, except that he goes a little bit too far. Senator Portman and Senator Coburn have amendments that would allow an opt-out from the whole federal highway fund, which includes transit. I think that goes too far. I have a bill that would allow the opt-out of states that would be able to spend their highway funds the way they believe the priorities are. But the 20% of the Highway Trust Fund that goes for transit, I think should be able to be kept for the urban areas that need that kind of bus transportation. And also, of course, we have the funding for transit that is rail. And I think we ought to be able to keep that at the federal level to determine what are the worthy grants. That's what the Highway Trust Fund now does. The Portman Amendment would take that away and put it into the state highway departments, and that would sound good on the surface. But knowing that the highway departments have, in general, certainly I can speak from my state's experience, they have not focused on or prioritized mass transit, which is one of the reasons why our cities in Texas are clogged, and in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio it's getting worse and worse, and Austin. And I would like to see those cities be assured that transit funding would go forward as it is envisioned. Or I would be happy to amend my bill to say that the 20% of transit funding could be opted out, but it would have to go for transit funding in the states. and the states could then set the priorities, but it would not be shortchanged by the highway departments that have not prioritized mass transit. So I think we need to work a little bit more. I couldn't support the Portman amendment the way it's written, but I would like to gather the people who believe that we should have an opt-out of our highway funds and get a stronger mass, which I think Senator Coburn and Senator Portman would do if they would just take the transit out so that the states that have transit funding needs would get their funding back for those transit needs, and it would be designated for those purposes. So I think we have some work to do. I'd like to support the Portman amendment, but not in the present form that it's in, but I'm hoping that down the road other states will want to be able to opt out as well. But for now, I hope that we will be able to stop the tolling of our federal highways as a first step to keep the faith with the American taxpayers who for 50 years have built the federal highway system and deserve to be able to drive to any state on a federal highway without being shut out by a state that decides to put a toll on it for their own purposes. These are federal highways built with federal tax dollars, and they should be open to every taxpayer in America to drive or use those freeways for commerce, and I hope that my amendment will be considered. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. And suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okaka.
President,
Senator from California.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection. Morning business is now closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1813, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 311, S. 1813, a bill to reauthorize federal aid highway and highway safety construction programs and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I know Senator Bingham is here, so I'm just going to make a quick unanimous consent request that the time until noon be equally divided between the two leaders or their designees. There be 2 minutes equally divided prior to each vote, and that all votes after the first vote following the recess be 10-minute votes.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I believe the second amendment that we'll be voting on here right after lunch or right after noon is the amendment that Senator Durbin and I are proposing related to privatized toll roads. When a state privatizes an existing toll road, it shifts to the private company all responsibility for operations and maintenance in exchange for a cash payment, essentially. Under existing law, privatized toll roads are still included in the calculation of how much each state receives in federal highway funds. In my view, it does not make good sense for a state to be credited with federal highway funding needed to maintain that road once it has been shifted out of the public sphere to a private entity. And the private entity has taken on the legal responsibility to operate and maintain the road. The amendment would simply remove these privatized toll roads from consideration when we allocate highway funds. The amendment is very narrow. It applies only when a state sells off an existing toll road. It does not apply at all to any new construction. Now, when I say it sells off an existing toll road, I mean that it enters into a lease, in most cases a lease of 75 years or more, to a private entity to operate a toll road and collect the tolls and maintain the road. The amendment has the support of the American Automobile Association, the American Trucking Associations. I think it is good legislation, and it also has the support of the Owner-Operators Independent Drivers Association and the American Highway Users Alliance. This is a modest change in the law governing the allocation of federal funds for highways, but I think it is a common-sense proposal that should be supported by the members of the Senate. I hope very much that we can adopt this amendment when it comes to a vote. As I say, it is not the first vote that we are going to consider, the first amendment we are going to consider to this bill. Rather, it is the second of the two votes prior to the recess for the weekly caucuses. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum. Oh, excuse me. I withhold that request for absence of a quorum.
Call up your amendment now.
I ask unanimous consent to call up the amendment I've just been speaking about, amendment number 1759. Ask that the clerk report the amendment by number.
Without objection, the clerk will report the amendment by number.
Senator from New Mexico, Mr. Bingaman, proposes an amendment numbered 1759.
I'd ask that any further reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The Senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to say a few words about the First Amendment that will be voted on.
The Senator's reminded we're in a quorum call.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I think after about 6, 7 years I'd remember that, but slow learner. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk about the amendment that we call the Transportation Empowerment Act. This is actually legislation that's been worked on for over 10 years. Our ranking member, Senator Inhofe, helped to develop this legislation, and it's essentially the same as when he introduced it 10 years ago. And he pointed out that he had long believed that the best decisions are those made at the local level. Unfortunately, many of the transportation choices made by cities and states are governed by federal rules and regulations. This bill returns to the states the responsibility and resources to make their own transportation decisions. Those are Senator Inhofe's words. And I think we all know as a nation that we're not going to solve our spending and debt problem unless we're willing to begin to move some public services from Washington back to the states where they can be done more effectively and less expensively. One of those public services is transportation. I would just point out that the Transportation Department here at the federal level was formed almost 60 years ago to build our interstate highway system, and that system is essentially complete. The states maintain most of the interstate highways now with some federal support. The problem we have now is that 18 cents out of every gallon that's sold, a gallon of gasoline, that comes to Washington, and the majority of states get back less than they send. We have, I think, what could be called an infrastructure crisis in America. Roads and bridges are decaying everywhere, and we're behind on our maintenance and the building of new roads. So it's obvious that what we're doing is not working. The underlying bill, instead of solving the problems with real reforms, is just adding to what we're spending, above the trust fund, above the 18 cents, without any real reforms to make the system work better. So I think I can conclude that the current federal transportation finance system is broken. Since 2007, rather than evaluate true infrastructure priorities and attempt to live within our means by eliminating special interest programs, Congress has bailed out the Highway Trust Fund to the tune of $35 billion. With the pending reauthorization, the trust fund will require a bailout of another $13 billion. At the end of this big spending 2-year reauthorization, Congress will be back at the drawing board scrambling for additional budgetary gimmicks and offsets to keep this charade from imploding. If this was a traditional 6-year highway bill, at this rate of runaway spending, it would require a bailout of $39 billion from the general fund. There is a better way. It's time to get the Washington bureaucracy and costly regulations out of the way and empower states to be the primary decision makers for their own local and state infrastructure. My amendment allows for states to keep their gas taxes and set their own priorities while avoiding an additional layer of Washington bureaucracy. We should devolve the federal highway program from Washington to the states. We can dramatically cut the federal gas tax to a few pennies, which would be enough to fund the limited number of highway programs that serve a clear national purpose. In return, states could adjust their own gas taxes to make their own construction and repair decisions without costly rules such as Davis-Bacon regulations and without having to funnel the money through Washington's wasteful bureaucracy and some self-serving politicians. My amendment would free states from the wasteful and corrupt Davis-Bacon Act, which needlessly focuses or forces the government to pay labor union wages for construction projects. Davis-Bacon harms workers who choose not to join unions, and it raises the cost to taxpayers last year by nearly $11 billion. Our nation's fiscal situation is perilous, with a 15